But the Allies have continued the attack, dashing north to the Euphrates River to cut off the Iraqi forces' only safe escape route from the Kuwaiti border to Baghdad. With the Allied forces streaming northward through Iraq, west from Kuwait and south from Basra, US military commanders say the encirclement is almost complete. While cautioning that Iraq's elite Republican Guard remains a fighting force, military analysts in Washington say the war could effectively be over in 24 to 48 hours. The main trouble spot for the Allies right now is near the Kuwaiti airport, where small pockets of loyal Iraqi soldiers are providing fierce resistance. From the White House, President Bush has stated that the Allied attack will go on, scornfully rejecting Saddam's withdrawal offer as a desperate bid to regroup his forces to fight another day.
Saddam's most recent speech is an outrage. He is not withdrawing. His defeated forces are retreating. He is trying to claim victory in the midst of a rout, and he is not voluntarily giving up Kuwait. We will not attack unarmed soldiers in retreat. We have no choice but to consider retreating combat units as a threat and respond accordingly.
This morning's meeting was called for drivers to hear the latest on their long-running dispute over rest breaks now being heard in the Industrial Commission.
Members were incensed today. There was a strong possibility at one stage of the meeting they were not going to return to work. Contrary to the advice of the officials present, they decided not to collect fares this afternoon until 6 o'clock.
They are angry about a state transit report which says stress amongst bus drivers could be due to working conditions or to the fact that Newcastle employees have a heightened awareness of their right to claim compensation for stress and anxiety.
We are firmly of the opinion that state transit is trying to provoke us into some sort of wildcat disruptive action to try and divert attention away from the real dispute. But we're not going to be diverted away from it, and that report was just another example of it.
The drivers are also unhappy about the progress of negotiations through the Arbitration Commission, which resume next Wednesday.
Hailed as the best sprint field ever assembled at Newcastle, the Newmarket contained a number of Doncaster hopes. Not one of them was good enough to beat Ricochet Rosie.
Ricochet Rosie about to burst into the clear, and then Quicksilver Cindy. Here comes Post Elect and Comrade down the extreme outside. At the 200 metres mark, Comrade wide out has raced up with Ricochet Rosie. They go to the lead together. Little Rosie got clear again. Comrade's dying on his run, and it's Ricochet Rosie's Newmarket.
She's been penalised a kilo for the win, but will still only carry 54.5 in the Doncaster, the same weight she carried to victory yesterday. If Mick Dittman agrees to the ride, the mare's prospects will continue to look rosy.
The killing of 49-year-old John Frederick Brown in August 1989 rocked the greyhound racing world. Brown was a leading light in the industry with a 20-year track record and scores of winners to his credit. He was asleep in his Black Hill home with his 24-year-old de facto wife when an intruder entered the house and fired 4 shots. At least 2 hit Brown, killing him instantly. In the days that followed, police launched an intensive search of the property for the murder weapon and even called in police divers, but nothing was found. 2 months later, in October 1989, police arrested and charged 33-year-old Terry James Drayton, a horse trainer from Edgeworth, with Brown's murder. However, Reg Blanche, the Director of Public Prosecutions, was of the opinion that on the evidence at the moment, the Crown could not expect a conviction if the case went to trial. Under New South Wales law, the case can still be reopened if fresh evidence is brought forward. But for the moment, the many witnesses subpoenaed to appear in the murder trial have been told they're no longer needed, and the charges against Drayton have been dropped. John Church, NBN News.
It was last August that Mr Baird dropped his bombshell that the Shortland would be taken away and replaced with a smaller standby vessel. Even when it was pointed out that the ferry was not his to take, but a bicentennial gift from the federal government, Mr Baird refused to back down. That was until he began to feel the pressure from many quarters, none the least of which from the North of the Harbour Residents Action Group. It pointed out that a full-size standby vessel was essential to the safe and efficient operation of the Stockton ferry service. A spokesman today described the minister's reversal as a major victory.
It is a victory for the citizens of Stockton, but Newcastle as a whole. These ferries complement our city, and for the rehabilitation of the inner city business district, I think they're absolutely essential. They're essential to the Stockton people also.
Prematurely considering the matter of fait accompli, the government leased this vessel, the Marinda 2, from a private pitwater operator and fitted it out with state livery. But just one look at it would tell you it wouldn't do the job. Now the government plans to pay out that lease and return it to its owner, much to the relief of local charter operators who had feared it would be used for harbour cruises.
All along, the problem was money. The Stockton ferry service loses $500,000 a year. Mr Baird's back down today followed a meeting with local members, including George Keegan.
My recommendation to the Minister, a little bit more time should be spent on encouraging more people to use the service. Those people from Nelson's Bay and up there should be encouraged to park on the other side of Stockton and use the ferry service. It's a long way cheaper than driving all the way into town.
Miller was found guilty on 2 charges after being sent off by referee Greg McCallum during the match in Tamworth between the Knights and the Broncos. Because of his previous record, Miller was handed a 2-week suspension. Broncos captain Gene Miles was also found guilty of fighting on 2 counts with Miller, but escaped with a caution from Judiciary Chairman Dick Conti. Conti cited Miles' impeccable record in the Winfield Cup over 12 seasons as the reason for the caution. Because of their physical style of play, are the Knights being targeted for extra attention?
What concerns us is that playing the tough physical football that we do, and that is retaliated by other clubs and was retaliated on in that game by Brisbane, that sometimes, in our opinion, the referees maybe referee one side more than the other.
Jason Hoogerwerth also had a date with the judiciary over an incident with Broncos fullback Paul Horff, but was exonerated. Out of the fire and brimstone of Scully Park emerged a former All Black who was making everyone stand up and take notice.
Schuster clear, look at the support! He's got Doyle outside. He goes inside to Kemp. Doyle was unmarked. Schuster will get there himself. The try should have been scored on the outside to Doyle, but they still got it.
It's been a pretty steady progress so far, and I just hope he stays that way.
And the most pleasing part of Schuster's game is his improved defence.
Kevin Walter's back on the inside. No! Oh, great cover. Great cover from Newcastle.
So I've been very pleased in that aspect of the game in particular. I've been working on it for a while in the off season, and I think it's it's just starting to pay off.
If you want to buy a middle-of-the-range house in Newcastle, it will cost $103,500. That's a 1.5 increase for the month of January. If the run continues, a yearly rise of 18%. According to the Real Estate Institute of Australia, Newcastle topped Launceston, Adelaide and Canberra, the only other areas to record a rise. Real estate agent Cole Chapman says Newcastle's boost is related to the earthquake. 400 houses were destroyed in the quake. This had a flow-on effect for the rental market.
And when you get a tight rental market, that pushes people out of the rental market into buying because rents continue to escalate.
With more people bidding, prices have been rising. According to Mr Chapman, the Newcastle market is also catching up to the Sydney rises of the late 80s, moving in a constant growth rather than boom and bust.
Owen and Linda Griffiths, owners of the Advance 2, made a 3-week round trip to Middleton Reef, a speck in the ocean 250 kilometres north of Lord Howe Island. In more than 50 years of combined diving experience, they've never seen as many or as rare species of shark. Diving on a plateau rising 4 kilometres from the seabed, they were frequently surrounded by as many as 70 hybrid whaler sharks unique to the reef.
We went out there for the express purpose to have a look at the sharks, and boy, we sure saw some sharks.
The life there is just so enormous and prolific. There's everything there and everything's large.
While there, they discovered a rare 6-metre southern beaked whale floating dead in the water. Large tentacle and sucker marks on its skin led them to guess it had been drowned by a huge squid. They lashed what could have been a valuable scientific find to the hull of their boat, but it was picked to the bone by sharks. At a recent conference on sharks at Sydney's Taronga Park Zoo, world experts questioned the effectiveness of meshing off beaches and discussed the hidden values sharks can hold for humans.
Not to overblow their biomedical importance, but sharks have, for instance, a blood factor that will digress and kill tumors, but their real benefit is that they are a highly evolved, long-lived, extremely well-adapted animal that deserves to live and plays an important role in the ecosystem.
The Griffiths have a healthy respect for the predators.
I believe with sharks, if you, they're like a dog, if you pull his tail often enough he'll bite you, and don't turn your back on them too often because nobody's ever seen the shark that's bit them.
The Lord Mayor told a meeting of community leaders that Carrington slipways could be saved if the people of the Hunter put up a $10 million guarantee. The region's 5 councils will now debate the idea before returning to the Lord Mayor for a final conference. The Mayor insists that Carrington slipways has a viable future, but it cannot find a buyer able to come up with a guarantee. While he admits that asking the community to foot the bill is a tall order, the Mayor says the future of more than 800 jobs is at stake. He says just the lack of criticism of the idea is enough to encourage him.
We've had a cautious response to it, but all the real positive feedback I've got is variations in the way it should be done in a better way.
Even so, the scheme is fraught with pitfalls before it gets off the ground. John McNaughton's biggest fear is that he will build up the hopes of the Carrington slipways workers only to see them more disappointed when the layoff comes.
I wouldn't feel right about not giving it a go, so we've got to try, and if we're successful, well and good. But we would all feel badly if we didn't try, and that's the feeling I get around the community.
There is no doubt that Steamfest will happen on the April the 20th, 21st weekend and includes steamrollers, stationary engines and road-going steam trucks, along with most of the other regular exhibits. But without the 3801 and the other vintage steam locomotives, a lot of the soul would be missing.
The key to the matter is insurance. Up till now, the various vintage train societies have carried $5 million in public liability cover, with premiums ranging from $500 to $5,000, depending on the type of vehicles used and the type of operation.
But since the Hawkesbury tragedy, premiums will have gone through the roof. And as well, the government is now insisting on a doubling of the private society cover to $10 million. As well, discussions have centred on an accreditation scheme, that is, the setting of operational standards for each society to give insurers more confidence. 2 working parties set up by the government have an April deadline in mind. Transport Minister Baird's office said today this is to give Steamfest every chance. An announcement on excursion trains on public lines is expected any day.
While this may be International Women's Day 1991, the protesters say the women's movement still has far to go. They claimed women in every third household suffer physical and emotional attacks from men.
They live and experience violence as their reality.
The march organisers highlighted extreme cases of violence such as the tragic murder of Lee in November 1989 and more recently June Brislane in October 1990. The protesters marched to Civic Park and discussed a range of other issues including childcare and equal pay. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
"291 competitors made it the biggest field yet to take on the daunting 4-kilometre swim, but what a magnificent morning for a dip. Everything was in readiness to send them on their way, but the Mayor of Lake Macquarie, Ivan Welsh, was having a bit of trouble with the starting gun. Who needs a starting gun anyway, as most of the swimmers headed off before the official firing of the antique gun. And as he saw them get underway, Mayor Welsh issued one last order. As expected, it was Houseman who made the early pace, but right on his heels was an unexpected quarry in the form of Stillwater champion Donna Proctor. Proctor had swum superbly in the ocean to win the Manly Classic last weekend, and she was right on her form once again. Just behind the Australian teammates was last year's winner Jamie Jenkins, along with Nat McGregor, and they were applying plenty of pressure to the leaders. The field was starting to spread out with youngies and oldies from 8 to 70 trying to stay with the more experienced swimmers. The pace was a rugged one, and still Houseman and Proctor battled for the lead. But in the end it was Glenn Houseman who was able to touch terra firma first in the brilliant time of 38.30 minutes, and just 10 seconds behind, easily the first female out of the water, and in second place overall, Donna Proctor. Jamie Jenkins was third, followed by Nat McGregor, and they were followed by Joshua Blair and Guy Leach, who tied for 5th position, and Ben McGregor was in 7th spot.
It almost looks like a hospital emergency room, and the patient we provided was certainly in need of extensive treatment. Straight from the horrors of the NBN car park, it was a mechanical nightmare. Just the thing for Glendale TAFE students to practice on.
It should be able to increase the speed at which the number of jobs are turned over in the workshop. You should be able to get to the actual cause of the problem quicker. That's the whole idea of the thing.
The diagnostic computer is one of only 4 of its kind in Australia, and the first to be installed at a New South Wales TAFE college. It's state-of-the-art technology and designed to stay that way.
That's one of the aims of the machine. With another machine that has so many functions built into it, once technology changes, you're left with that machine. If you want to update, well, you have to move to another machine. By changing the disk, you can keep up to date by just changing software.
As for our patient, well, the heartbeat looked suspiciously like a seismograph, and the prognosis wasn't good.
I think we should push it out. The garbage truck comes around a couple of times during the week, so he might put it straight in a bin and he can take it away.
Which means it's got a lot in common with its owner after a heavy weekend. Bruce Mackenzie, NBN News.
In reverse.
Today there were grim faces in the auction chamber. Yesterday's dramatic fall of nearly 40% in broader microns and 15% in superfine is worse than experts had predicted.
A lot of clients were expecting the downturn in the wool industry, as we all know, but a lot of very, very disappointed people.
When the government subsidy is lifted in June, growers will be the ones to suffer.
I think for the people that live out west, it'll be very, very difficult because some of their wools were sold yesterday for 235 cents a kilo, and I feel quite sure that people growing the wool out there, it's not a viable proposition at those prices.
380, 60, 1, 2.
I would think that probably 20% of people in the west won't be able to survive the crisis that's on at this moment.
But it's not all bad news. Yesterday, 95% of wool went to trade, and Chinese and Japanese buyers were back in the bidding after an absence while prices were artificially high. Now prices are down to a world market level, steady at around 50 to 70 US cents above South Africa and South America.
Delivering his industry statement in Canberra this afternoon, the Prime Minister also announced harsher laws to prevent dumped imports damaging local industry. 3 people were shot in a bungled armed hold-up in Sydney's west this morning. The employees of a car repair shop in Canterbury were wounded as they struggled with 2 would-be bandits. And a group of Mayfield residents have revealed their suburb is being coated with pollution. The residents have staged an angry public meeting calling for a stop to the worsening problem.
The Knights were busy trying their new after-hours uniforms on for size, but come Saturday they'll have to measure up against a powerful Cronulla outfit.
Everybody's on a performance level, everybody, and I'm sure that the side we've picked will perform.
Cronulla Sutherland, a tough nut to crack first up. Is it a case of try and contain that back line and do the damage up the middle?
Mate, Cronulla are pretty strong, I think, in the middle too, you know what I mean, and that's been bolstered a hell of a lot. There's other areas and other factors that are probably just more important than doing that, and it's going to be a very hard clash.
Controversial selections include wingers Tony Kemp and Adrian Bronca, who get their chance at the expense of John Schuster. After some mixed pre-season form, Kemp knows he's under pressure to perform.
I've been pretty happy that I've been picked back in the first grade. It's now up to me to keep my position, and there'll be nothing more that I can do than have a good game and keep my established position in there.
Halfback Steve Linnane has been in fine touch, but the return of Stevie Fulmer means he'll have to produce the goods against the Sharks to keep his place.
There's plenty of pressure there at the moment to perform, and I can just do well and hopefully keep my spot.
There was an air of anticipation at East Maitland Court this morning as the trial entered its 3rd week, with the closing addresses by defence and prosecution over and the judge now well into his summing up. There was speculation that the jury may retire to consider its verdict by mid-afternoon. However, when the gallery emerged at lunchtime, it was apparent that the vast amount of technical and eyewitness information could not be covered before this evening. Ngluka skipper Dennis Warner, charged with culpable navigation, appeared briefly after the 1-hour lunch break with wife Carol by his side. The now familiar faces of parents and relatives of the 5 children who drowned when the pleasure craft capsized in Port Stephens in January last year also returned to sit through the afternoon summing up of the evidence of expert witnesses. When the jury does retire to consider its verdict, it will face the daunting prospect of reviewing 12 days of hearings, including submissions by 14 Ngluka survivors and half a dozen expert witnesses. They've been assisted by a marathon 2-day summing up by presiding Judge E. Payne. His address is expected to conclude tomorrow morning.
Scenes like these will continue to be commonplace throughout the Hunter for at least the next month. Workcover inspectors have spent the last 2 weeks checking safety regulations governing the sale of LP gas and have found an alarming number of infringements.
We've visited to date 150 sites, and there's 56 notices being issued to date. Some of those notices are multiple notices, and I expect that will continue as the blitz goes on.
Commercial and household tanks must be checked at least once every 10 years and have the inspection date stamped near the valve. The onus is on retailers to ensure safety. They face fines of up to $4,000 if their own operation doesn't comply with the regulations, and a further $1,000 if they're caught refilling an unsafe household container.
Most of the infringements are regarding signage on the operation, and even though that is a safety hazard, it's not as dangerous as a corroded bottle. But we have picked up a number of corroded bottles, and that's what's alarming. They are what we would class as a lethal bomb.
Private gas tanks can be inspected at any major distribution depot.